Hello, everyone, and welcome. We apologize for the technical glitch. Our Zoom account is running into some problems, so we had to send a last-minute change to the Zoom link. So if you would just bear with us, give us a couple extra minutes here to allow some people time to get that new link. We will begin in just about 2 minutes. Again, we apologize for the delay and thank you for your understanding and patience. Thanks. Be right with you. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started with our introduction, and hopefully some additional people will find their way over to the new link. Again, I apologize sincerely for the delay. Christy, do you mind going to the next slide? Thank you so much. So welcome to today's discussion on Emotions Matter, Social Emotional Learning at Home and in the Community. This webinar and talk is sponsored by the Northeast and Caribbean Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, or MHTTC, housed at Rutgers School of Health Professions, Department of Psychiatric Rehabilitation. My name is Anne Murphy, and I am the director of the MHTTC and will be helping to facilitate the webinar today. The MHTTC is funded by SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, to enhance the capacity of the behavioral health and other related workforces to deliver evidence-based and empirically supported practices to individuals with mental health conditions. We've also been charged with providing additional support to K-12 teachers and staff, as well as other individuals who support students in K-12 education who are experiencing either mental health conditions or other supports related to emotional wellness. Next slide, Christy. We encourage you to visit the MHTTC network website for additional information. The website is mhttcnetwork.org, and you can navigate to our center by clicking on Find Your Center and then clicking on the Northeast and Caribbean. If you're interested in keeping up to date with other activities and products that we create, you can subscribe to receive our mailings, our emails at the bit.ly link on the screen. We also want to ask that you complete the survey that will be made available to you at the end of this webinar. We value this feedback and we use it to improve our activities and to inform future activities. The surveys are also important because our funder looks at the surveys and the feedback that's given through those surveys. So we thank you in advance for taking, they take just a minute or two to complete. We appreciate you doing that at the end of this presentation. We also wanted to let you know that the webinar is being recorded and will be posted to our website following this session. And in fact, in just a few moments, I'll also post a link in the chat to the recording of the first session of this series. This webinar is also meant to be interactive. So on your screen, you'll see that you have a taskbar. I'll draw your attention to two particular buttons. One is the chat button. The chat, you can put any comments throughout, comments, questions, observations. Please feel free to communicate with myself and with the presenter using the chat function throughout the presentation. You can also chat with your fellow attendees there. You'll notice if you click on the chat that there's a drop-down arrow that allows you to toggle between submitting comments that only the panelists can see, or that you can select panelists and all attendees, and then your fellow attendees will also be able to see your comments. You can also submit questions using the Q&A feature. If you would like to use that, I'll be collecting any comments and questions that you make throughout the presentation, and then we'll have time at the end for our presenter to address those comments and questions. Just a brief disclaimer, this presentation was prepared for the MHTTC network under a cooperative agreement from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA. The opinions expressed herein are the views of the presenters and do not reflect the official position of the Department of Health and Human Services, or SAMHSA. And I am happy to introduce or reintroduce, if you were in the first presentation, our presenter for today. Christy Rowalski has over 20 years of experience leading large-scale grant projects and working with parents and schools around special education services and supports. Her experience includes expanding systems of support and providing technical assistance to large urban school districts, residential treatment centers, and approved private schools. In addition, she has managed the on-site grant coordination for several federal and private grant projects, including strategic literacy interventions, weaving social and emotional learning into school culture, and parent management training to support treatment foster care families. We're happy that she's part of our MHTTC team, and we're very happy that she's able to provide this presentation to you today. So I will turn it over to Christy.
Thank you so much, Anne. Good evening, everyone. Again, I just want to express our sincere apologies about the technical difficulties, and thank you for still joining us this evening. So just welcome to parents and caregivers and educators who are joining us. Thank you for joining me. Today is a beautiful Wednesday. I feel like spring is in the air. I'm happy to be back to talk to you today about something that I am very passionate about and what I believe really to be the foundation of academic success and adult resilience. So today's workshop will focus on social emotional learning, or for short, we call SEL. So our objectives for today are to define social emotional learning. So really understand what SEL is. There's a lot of myths about what SEL is, to describe what SEL looks like at home and at school. And then we'll actually look at some SEL strategies that can be used at home and in school. And these are fairly simple strategies that you can even implement tonight or tomorrow. So before we kind of jump right into the material, I wanted to kind of start off with an icebreaker. And so The icebreaker is, how do you feel about the school year so far? So how do you feel about the school year so far? So in the chat box, if you could actually put your response. So either you can respond by typing A, hey, I'm feeling great, everything is going fantastic. Or you could put B, I'm managing, right? So that means, yeah, things are going okay. C, I'm feeling a little anxious, right? So I'm feeling a little anxious, I'm feeling a little worried. D, I'm beginning to lose it. Or E, I lost it, I need a break. So go ahead and kind of enter that in the chat box there.
Saskia, I see a good number of Bs. I'm managing.
Managing,
Some
okay.
Cs. I'm feeling a little anxious. We've gotten at least one D. I'm beginning to lose it. And someone's saying went from an E to a B recently. So that's positive.
Yes, that is.
We'll have to hear from that person how they manage that. But some more B's and C's coming in.
Right. Okay. So the reason why I really wanted to start with this poll question is because I wanted to show the range of emotions we all feel about this one topic in particular, but the range of emotions that we feel on a daily basis, really, right? So we can go from being happy and, kind of even on our way to work, if we are actually having to leave the house, to getting some bad news and now feeling sad. And so we go through a range of emotions throughout the day. So nearly everything that we do throughout our lives depends really on our emotions. Emotions inform our thinking and decisions, the quality of our relationships, our physical and mental health, and honestly, our everyday performance. So the point that I'm really trying to make here is that emotions matter. So think about our emotions almost as a keyboard, right? And some children start school having all of their emotional keys, and others are lacking the keys that they need to be successful, maybe academically or interpersonally. And so really it's our job as educators and parents to really help replace the keys they are missing with the necessary social and emotional skills to really be successful, and not just academically, but in life. So when we talk about social emotional learning and what is SEL, simply put, it's the skills we need for happiness and success in school and life. It's how we really understand ourselves and how we work well with others, and our ability to make good decisions. So just really quickly in the chat, how many folks think SEL is a behavior intervention? So type yes or no. How many folks think that SEL is a behavior intervention?
Seeing a mix of responses, some yes, some no.
Okay.
One absolutely.
Oh, okay. So that is actually false. That is a myth. So SEL is not a behavior intervention, right? SEL is really, now it can help, right? Support positive classroom environments, but it is not a behavioral intervention. So a more formal definition is SEL is the process through which children and adults acquire and effectively apply the knowledge, the attitude, and skills necessary to understand and manage emotions, to establish and maintain personal relationships, to feel and show empathy to others. So one thing that really stands out to me about this definition is, if you notice, it just doesn't say children, but it says adults too. So I think that's a really important point to make, that SEL is not just for children, but it's for adults as well. So I wanted to kind of provide some context around the SEL framework. So the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, which is also known as CASEL, is really at the forefront of kind of leading this work across our country. They provide guidance and research on SEL best practice. Systemic SEL is really promoted across multiple contexts every day. So CASEL's widely used framework identifies 5 core competencies that when prioritized really across settings, so that could be districts, that could be schools, it could be classrooms, it could be in the community, families. There's even a lot of research that's now being done about social emotional learning in the workplace, right? That when we really focus on these things through a systemic lens and we prioritize them across these settings, that we can educate hearts, inspire minds, and really help students navigate the world more effectively. So we'll take a closer look at those 5 core competencies later on in the presentation, but I did want to take an opportunity to introduce them today, earlier on in the presentation. And those 5 core areas are self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness. So what does the research tell us about SEL? And I think this is really important to mention. So there was a large study conducted, I think it was in 2017, that really examined data from a number of independent studies. They usually refer to that as a meta-analysis to determine overall trends with social emotional learning. And here's what the results revealed, right? That SEL showed improved attitudes about self, others, and schools. And so this is extremely important to mention because obviously this was really important to educators, right? Is one of the main reasons why they value SEL. That it did improve classroom, positive classroom behavior, right? I think one of the key points to mention, though, is that through this research, they also found that there was 11 percentile point gain in academics, right, when it came to standardized achievement tests. So this kind of improvement on academics is really what has gotten the attention of so many educators as it relates to social emotional learning. And I don't want to forget about the data points in red. So it's important to mention that we also seen through this research that there's been reductions in conduct problems. And then there's been reductions in emotional distress as well. So we are definitely living in a time when emotional distress, depression, anxiety, and suicide are at an all-time high. So understanding that SEL can have an impact here is important, but with a word of caution, right? So SEL should not be viewed as a solution for mental illness, but more seen as a protective factor. So the more protective factors that are in place, we know the less likely a young person will develop a mental health or substance use disorder. So social emotional learning in action. So now that we have kind of a basic understanding about what social emotional learning is, and what the research tells us, I want us to take a closer look at what SEL looks like in school and at home. So SEL in schools. So students have been in school for most of their lives. I always like to say that they're the real experts. So when adults co-create and cultivate a space with students so that they can be a part of all the decisions and really impacting school culture, the entire school community wins. We also know that when we talk about social emotional learning in schools, that there are different curricula that you can implement. One of the most popular is called Second Step. However, I think it is really important to mention that you don't need a curriculum to implement social emotional learning in schools. There are definitely ways to align SEL with academic objectives and really within the classroom and the larger school community. So we'll talk a little bit about that more when we kind of look at those 5 core competencies. I'll give some concrete strategies and examples that you can implement in the classroom and even at home. So really SEL in schools is about building supportive classroom environments, right? And creating opportunities for community building and creating a sense of belonging and really creating a sense of emotional safety for our students. And so when you think about SEL in homes and communities, families really are a child's first teacher. We know that social emotional programs or social emotional learning programs are really more effective when they extend into the home. And so, for example, that would look like holding a space for a training like this today, right? And giving parents the opportunities to kind of learn about some of these strategies and how they can implement similar strategies in the home. The other thing to mention is really about cultivating students' community awareness, and then building really strong partnerships between the school and the home. So before I kind of jump into looking, taking a second for us to kind of explore the castle wheel, or take a trip around the castle wheel, as I like to say, I want you to think about someone you looked up to while growing up, right? It may take a minute to think about that, someone that you really admired growing up. Think about what skill or quality did he or she possess? And when you have that, type it in the chat. So again, we're thinking about someone that we would maybe even consider to be a role model growing up. So it could have been a teacher, it could be an older sibling. Think about, the skills or qualities that he or she possessed that made you really look up to them.
We've got a couple responses here. We've got passion for instructional topic, grounded and trustworthy,
Yes,
unconventional style, like that, honesty and kindness,
oh yes,
confidence. If anybody else wants to share.
nice. These are all great.
Ooh,
Say it again, sorry.
authenticity, I'll say. Calm demeanor and ability to actively listen. Kindness, another one for confidence, warmth and empathy. Made students feel important. Another, honesty and sincerity.
Yes, thank you so much for participating. And all of those are wonderful responses. And guess what? All of those things are directly related to social emotional learning, right? And so we'll talk about, like I said, those 5 core competencies, but everything that you mentioned, kindness, empathy, compassion, the ability to problem solve, having confidence, grounding, being honest, all of those things are really related to social emotional learning. So I think, again, this is really just about, thinking about those individuals that impacted our lives. And now we are really entering in a space where we're being more intentional about providing these skills to our students. So that way we can prepare them to enter the world. So now we're going to really, like I said, take a trip around the castle wheel and talk about how we can support the social and emotional development of our children. And so the next few slides, we're going to kind of pull apart, right, all of those 5 core SEL competencies and really look at how we can integrate them into the home and into the classroom. So I'll be sharing with you some concrete examples. And just like I did for the last training, which I think is so important, especially when it relates to this work, because I know a lot of folks in the past when I've presented, they want to be able to implement right away, right? They want to be able to take these strategies and put them into practice right away. And so I know I have another Padlet link that we can share at the end of the presentation. So then that way you'll have access to a lot of the resources that I'm talking about this evening. So let's start with self-awareness. So self-awareness really just is the ability to understand one's own emotions, thoughts, and values, and how they influence the behavior across multiple settings. So some examples could be things like being able to identify one's emotions. So really being able to have that emotional vocabulary to articulate how you're feeling. Linking those feelings and values to your thoughts, and really having a growth mindset. So here are some self-awareness strategies as it relates to labeling emotions. So emotional check-ins are one of the most important things we can do to really support the mental and emotional health of our youth. Emotional check-ins really help students to tune in to their body and how they are feeling. It also helps our youth expand their emotional vocabulary, so that there are a variety of ways to do this. But I've seen this done even really nicely virtually using Google Docs. And I believe that I have a version of that on the Padlet that we'll share later. There are also even worksheets that parents could print off with emotional vocabulary or emojis for younger students, and using it before the beginning of the day or even after the school day is a great way to have those honest conversations about how students are feeling. And I know I have some educators that are on the line as well. I would say this is great to use for morning meetings. I've even had some teachers share with me that they've used the emotional check-in right before an exam, right? To see how students are feeling, or maybe right after an exam, and kind of use that even as a form of data, right? To see maybe if some students are feeling anxious around a certain topic. And then, using that as a tool to kind of engage in further conversation to understand what's bothering them. One of my favorite strategies, or another great self-awareness strategy that I really like is, and this actually can be used at home and at school, is what's called a dialogue journal. So dialogue journals are a great way to kind of build student and teacher rapport and strengthen even parent and child relationships. So it's really a great way to provide a safe space for children to kind of communicate their feelings. So again, virtually, I've seen this done even using Google Docs, where it's just obviously shared with the teacher. It works very nicely as a do now or even an exit ticket. As a rule of thumb, though, remember that when we're kind of responding back, because the way that this works is that, that the student or your child would kind of write you a message and that you would respond back to them. So as a rule of thumb, we want to remember to kind of like validate their feelings and respond with empathy. And I know from a teacher's perspective, this seems like, oh my goodness, this would be a lot, right? Like if I have a class of 30 students trying to respond to all of them. But there are some suggestions here. So you could decide to respond to students only once a week, or choose like one pre-existing group that you could respond to, or maybe draw names, right? And determine who you would respond to on a weekly basis or a monthly basis. If you teach multiple classes, you could choose one class to kind of write to at a time. The idea is to really get creative with this and do what works for you. I think the most important thing here is just responding to students or trying to respond to them on a regular basis. I actually have seen this done really nicely too. Obviously, this was before the pandemic, and one school that I was working with, and one of the teachers used this as part of it was standard in her classroom. And so that was the do now. As soon as students came in, they grabbed their journals and they wrote her a little message, and then she would just respond back to them. Again, it didn't have to be a lengthy response. A lot of times it was, great job. I like the way you handle that. I'm here to help you, right? Like, I'm here to support you. Again, it's really just about strengthening the relationship between the teacher and the student. All right, so now we're making our way to around the wheel. We are on self-management. Self-management is the second SEL competency. I should note, though, that self-awareness and self-management go hand in hand, right? It's why they actually share the same orange color that you see on the wheel. Both focus on SEL skills that deal with self. So self-management really is the ability to manage one's emotions and thoughts. So for example, it could be identifying strategies when I'm feeling stressed or mad or angry, right? How do I calm myself down? Really the ability to set personal and collective goals, and showing the courage to really take initiative. So when we think of some self-management strategies that are really, really helpful, grounding is a powerful calming technique that really can help us focus on the present by really using your five senses and to notice and focus on things currently around you. So this really helps to like bring you back to the present moment versus overthinking about the past or the future. So we can actually practice this virtually, which is nice because a lot of techniques sometimes are really hard to practice over the computer. So let's try to practice this just a little bit. So the way it would work is we would start with naming 5 things that you see. So you would use your eyes to kind of look around. And you could say things like, so this would be from my perspective, right? I see a lamp. I see my water jug here, right? I have a box of tissues. Believe it or not, I have a little stuffed animal here on my desk. I see the picture that's on my wall, and I see my computer, right? So it really helps me to focus on the present moment and kind of calm the thoughts that may be racing in my mind. So take a moment really quickly, right? Look around you and maybe just type 5 things that you can see around you right now. 5 things that you can see around you. I think, well, we'll just take our time. I think it's really important. This is the end of the day for most of us. We may have been working, managing homeschool. So again, just taking a moment to really ground ourselves in the present moment. And do we have any responses that are coming in?
We do, yes. It looks like some folks are outside, or maybe just by a window. I'm just feeling jealous that
I know.
the sky and clouds. We have some pets, which I appreciate.
Oh, yes.
And lots of other chair, notebook, computer, books.
Nice.
Phones, trees.
And again, you may notice that it really forced you to stop and kind of be present in the moment. I know some of you said pets. Pets are so great for our emotional health. I know even when I take my dog for a walk, and this is something to even consider, and this is from an adult SEL perspective, right? But I use this grounding technique because it really helps me to calm my thoughts on, from the day, or, I'm a parent, all of the things that I need to do, right? So even when you are outside and you're walking your pet, you could kind of do this activity. But again, this is a great strategy to teach our kids as well, right? Because one thing to keep in mind, even for the educators that are on the call, and parents, right, is that we have a high prevalence of youth who are trying to manage anxiety in school. And we actually knew that before. So this was even before the pandemic, right? So even before the pandemic, I believe the numbers were close to 32% of students, right, were in schools we're trying to cope with or manage anxiety. So think about that in terms of the new number of students in your classroom, or think about that in terms of the larger school building, right? So anxiety is often caused by negative thoughts, overthinking. So having students really practice these grounding techniques, or even positive self-talk. So I have that on the slide as well. Positive self-talk can have a big impact on how we think and feel. So, over time, engaging in positive self-talk can really help reduce our stress, improve our self-esteem, and increase motivation. It is so normal for our minds to always go to the negative, right? And so that's why it's so important to kind of train ourselves to reframe, right, those negative statements. Even when we hear, because I'm sure as educators, even as parents, we'll hear that a lot. Oh man, I only did well on that test due to luck, but really, or you'll hear, our kids saying, oh, I'm not good at this, right? I'm not doing well here. This is really hard. And so really helping them frame those negative statements and turn them into positive ones. And so even back to my first example, when I said, oh, I only did well on that test due to luck, say, algebra concepts come easy to me. I passed the test with flying colors. Another great strategy is belly breathing. So belly breathing exercises are great to use when children feel upset or emotionally overwhelmed. It's important to practice these techniques when your child is calm, so that way they can be prepared to use them when needed, right? So it's nothing like being in distress and then trying to learn a new strategy. It's more impactful when we practice those strategies when we're not feeling emotionally charged. And then the last one I have here is just developing stop signals. So stop signals work really well when we are feeling angry or extremely frustrated. Having those stop signals, and it could be a silly word, right? So with my nephew, and he's only 5, but you can imagine when he gets angry, right? He may even have a temper tantrum. And so one of the things that I've told him is, when you're feeling angry, you can, start to feel, maybe you start to feel hot, or maybe your hands start to feel a little wet. Make sure you say the word Cookie Monster, right? Make sure you say the word Cookie Monster in your head. And then, just letting him know, giving him those calming techniques, right? To be able to recenter and focus. So again, all of these strategies are considered from the SEL perspective as self-management, and they're so key to helping our students being able to manage their emotions. All right, so we're on our third SEL competency, which is responsible decision-making. One thing I want to note is, and I'm sure you probably know this from just kind of looking at the castle wheel here, is that it's not orange and it's not green, right? So it kind of stands alone and it's yellow, and that's because responsible decision-making kind of stands by itself. It definitely is connected, right, to the other 4 competencies. And it's critical for navigating the challenges life may bring, but it doesn't have to necessarily do with when we think about managing our emotions and self. And when you think about social awareness and relationship skills, that really has to deal with how we interact with others. So responsible decision-making really just is the ability to make caring and constructive choices about personal behavior, social interactions, across the diverse situations. So for example, this would be things like identifying solutions for personal and social problems. We call this problem solving, and we actually talked a little bit about that during the last webinar when we were discussing motivation. Another point to mention is responsible decision-making is recognizing how critical thinking skills are useful inside and outside of school. So when we look at some strategies as it relates to responsible decision-making, one thing that I want to mention is just that responsible decision-making and problem solving is really the foundation for resilience and persistence. So I always say that one cannot exist without the other. And so think about, how you can even embed these things within the classroom. So for example, introducing ethical challenges, right, in the classroom can create opportunities for critical thinking and self-reflection. Basically using the academic content to challenge students to think critically. For parents, this may look like when you're watching a movie or a TV show together, right? Asking questions about why did the character choose to make certain decisions? I always feel like Disney movies do this very well. They just naturally incorporate social emotional learning. So again, just being very intentional about asking questions and, hey, the character decided to make this decision. What would you have done? Right? And why would you have made that choice? So this again is just some very easy to implement strategies around responsible decision making. So relationship skills, I should mention that relationship skills and social awareness go hand in hand. They both directly relate to how we interact with others and the world around us. So relationship skills really just are the ability to establish and maintain healthy, supportive relationships. We know how important that is, even as adults, because we know that life can be difficult, right? And life can present some challenges. And so having a support network and maintaining a supportive relationships is really crucial and key. So for example, it relates to, again, like I said, having a good support system, but even when we think about sending our children into the workforce, right, and making sure that they can collaborate well with others and practice teamwork and problem solving, showing them what it really looks like to communicate effectively, and what does it mean to be a leader? What does it mean to be a leader? So educators, this is a great activity to kind of use in the classroom, even during virtual learning, is kind of pairing students and having them identify the similarities and differences that they may have, right? This also serves as a great lesson on empathy. Another thing to think about too is really providing opportunities for students to practice and model assertive communication. So, by doing that, and I think one of the best ways to do this is using a mnemonic, which is called BEST, right? So B stands for body language, which really is what is your body language saying through your posture and your movements. Eye contact, right? So is, whether you're looking at the other person during conversation, and also how you do so, right? And even practicing those things in a virtual world. Speech, we obviously know, is the verbal content of what we say, but tone, I would argue, is probably the most important here. If you all remember the saying, it's not what you say, but how you say it. So again, all of these things are really critical in terms of helping students build those really key relationship skills. Another great thing to consider for the educators on the call is having a sharing circle with students, right? And having them identify when is it the hardest to be your best, right? So kind of using that mnemonic, when is it the hardest to be your best? And have them identify why. And what is it about the person, the place, or the time and the situation that makes it difficult? All right. So lastly, we have here is social awareness. And I kind of mentioned already that social awareness and relationship skills go hand in hand. And social awareness really is just, like I said, the ability to understand the perspectives of and empathize with others, including those from diverse backgrounds, cultures, and contexts. So it's really being intentional about recognizing the strengths that others can bring, showing concerns for how others feel or how things may affect them, and understanding and expressing gratitude. So when we think about some social awareness strategies that can be really effective, and this is from the parent's point of view, is really considering some compassion activities that you could do as a family, right? And that could be something simple as going through old clothes or old toys and donating those items, or participating in volunteer opportunities. And yes, they are a lot of volunteer opportunities that are virtual now, even. Increasing students' empathy and compassion really helps to create a caring and positive school community and larger community as a whole. So this could even mean sending kind wishes to local hospitals or restaurants or family members, especially during this difficult time. The other thing to consider too is, and this is from the educator's perspective, is kind of having sharing circles to increase students' awareness about their individual identities and the role that they play in society. So sharing circles usually start with a question, for the group to answer, like, if you could trade places with anyone in the world, who would it be and why? And again, these are great things to use as a part of morning meetings, or again, as as an opportunity when you bring the whole class together for larger discussion. So in closing, one of the things that I just wanted to mention is over the last few years across the country, momentum around social emotional learning has really increased because of the research, right? Has confirmed our instincts about what is important. And we see it from all sectors. And I think I've kind of talked about that throughout the presentation today. But that means parents, employers, principals, teachers, students themselves essentially are screaming that we believe SEL is critical. And one other thing that I really wanted to highlight, because I think this is so important when we think about preparing our students for a competitive and ever-changing workplace, is that SEL skills are just as critical as education. And this survey that was actually done, and it was from executives, say skills such as problem solving and communicating clearly are equally or more important than technical skills. And so they actually list the top 10 skills identified by the World Economic Forum. And they all involve some form of social emotional competence. So again, I just want to leave you, before we kind of get into the Q&A, is your greatest accomplishment may not be something you do, but someone you raise. And so I think this would be a good time. Either we can open it up for questions. I do want to be mindful of time because I know we were running a little bit late. And I think this would also be a good time, and if we could drop the Padlet link into the chat, so then that way folks have access to a lot of the resources that I shared today.
Wonderful, Christy. I did just put that in the chat box.
Oh, great.
People have access to it there. We do want to open it up at this point. If anybody has any questions that they want presented to Christy, you can type them in the chat, or you can type them in the Q&A and I will ask them. We did get some questions in advance, Christy, that I wanted to present to you. So the first one of those, as people are thinking and starting to send in additional questions, is how would you recommend getting your child to verbalize what they're feeling?
Yeah, this is a good question. I think it's important for us to remember as adults that not all children are comfortable expressing their thoughts verbally, right? And that there are so many different ways to communicate. And so sometimes even children even feel more comfortable expressing themselves through art. So, and I say that, and I'm definitely thinking about some of the younger students that I've worked with in the past when I've had, trouble getting them to express themselves verbally. I would ask them to draw a picture, and from there, have them explain to me the picture. And usually what you'll gather from the picture is how they're feeling. And so, for example, I remember working in a first grade classroom, and there was a little girl in the classroom, and she looked visibly upset, but she wouldn't tell me what was going on. And so I asked her to draw a picture, and she drew these little stick figures, and it was two people. And so I said, hey, can you tell me who the two people are? And she said, well, that's me. And that's a boy from the other classroom, the other first grade classroom. I said, okay. And she says, he's been bullying me at lunch. And so we were able to kind of get down to what the problem was and kind of address it. But it was all through, again, she wasn't comfortable actually verbalizing how she was feeling. She did it through drawing. Another great strategy that can work wonders for teenagers, and I think I kind of mentioned this earlier on, is keeping a dialogue journal where you can write each other a little note once a week. This is a great strategy for parents, leaving the journal in a special place. And kind of writing back and forth to each other. So as a friendly reminder, kids watch how we express our emotions too. So that's something to really keep in mind, is that Kids model the behavior that they see. So, make sure that you're kind of also showing your child how you're feeling. And I think this even goes for educators as well, right? Like expressing how you're feeling and how you manage those feelings so that they can see that, oh, it's right. It's completely normal to have these feelings. And I just need to know how to manage them. Um, Another helpful tool for younger students is a lot of times they may not even have the emotional vocabulary to express how they feel. And so there are so many wonderful resources online that have, everything from emojis to pictures of people's faces and how showing different feelings. So I think sometimes that imagery really helps as well.
Thank you, Christy. We got a question in the chat that I
Okay.
wanted to go to. So the question is about how we can help children who have developed some of those anxious behaviors that they're not aware of, like biting their fingernails, or they might pick at their skin, those kinds of things that they may have developed during this pandemic.
Yes. Wow. That's so, yeah. That's a really good question. And so I think a lot of times when we see that students have kind of picked up on these habits, it's really a form of calming, right? It's a form of self-soothing. And so even as in my background, I have background too as in behavior. It's really important to understand that we need to now replace that with something else, right? And so that may look like, instead of picking, well, even pulling your hair or, biting your nails, thinking of something else that can replace that anxious energy. And so I think I mentioned this before and I think I may even included some things on the other Padlet, but even providing some type of fidget, right, to keep in your hand. I remember a good colleague of mine, she would always tell me, I get so anxious when I present. And I told her, oh, and she's like, I seem like I'm fidgeting. I said, oh, you know what? You may want to consider just keeping a pen in your hand, right? So again, thinking about a replacement behavior for the behavior that they're currently using.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. I know I myself have a putty that I play with sometimes to try to avoid doing any of those things. And also, I think drawing aware, like helping them become more aware of when they're doing it, and then using some of those techniques you shared, some of those grounding techniques that you shared later to try and, because I think it's sort of unconscious anxiety.
It is.
Right?
It totally is. Yep.
So anytime you can do things to kind of bring that down.
You could even have them track the behavior too, which can be very powerful. Have them keep like a little tally sheet to say, oh my goodness, I've done that 10 times within the last, 10 minutes to bring awareness to that too.
Yeah, I agree. I know we're a few minutes over, so people may need to leave, but I thought maybe we could just try and do one or two more, since we started a little bit late.
Sure.
But we certainly understand if people have to go, so that's okay too. There are a couple questions around connectedness. So one was, how can educators help students feel more connected to the community because of virtual learning, and also how can we use some of the SEL approaches to help students feel more connected during this time?
Absolutely. So I'll start with the students first. So one thing that I think really helps is that I think sometimes as adults, we underestimate the power of like student voice, and with that being said, I always say when we want to really think about ways to cultivate community and relationship building, even in this virtual space, that it is so important that we ask the students, right? And a lot of times I find that we jump right to programming and thinking about, oh, we could do this amazing strategy and we could do this and we can implement this activity. And then find that the students aren't necessarily interested because we've made assumptions as adults that we know, right, what activities may be engaging for them. Additionally, I've seen schools develop student SEL committees. When I tell you these committees are dynamic, they are so powerful. They really, the purpose of the committee is to really bring students together to help develop activities to keep students connected during this time. So that's something to consider as well. Obviously, you would need like an adult, like leader to kind of oversee the work. But I've seen that honestly work great in person, right, and virtually. So thinking about creating some type of SEL student committee. And then the other thing, and remind me again, the other part of the question was about community, right?
Right. For students who are feeling disconnected from the school community because they're learning virtually.
Right. And so I think that goes back to the point that I was making about really asking the students and surveying them and seeing what opportunities they would like to participate in. I know a lot of schools are still continuing to run groups, right? Despite, so these may be like fun activities like the yearbook committee or other things. There may be something, like I said, there was one school that had a social emotional learning club. So they're still running clubs despite the pandemic. And these clubs may meet once a week. I think another really awesome strategy too is don't be afraid to allow students, and this is more from the parent perspective too, is don't be afraid to allow students to connect with their peers, right? So maybe exchanging phone numbers, allowing them to, get on FaceTime and maybe kind of work through some of their, maybe a special project or even work through or collaborate on homework or things like that too. So I think that those are kind of good ways to allow students to still try to connect despite obviously the pandemic and what we're all experiencing.
Thank you. So I'm going to throw a hard one at you here. So one of the attendees has asked about how to support a preteen whose behavior is becoming a little defiant.
So that's a loaded question.
I was going to say, if you can
yes, like
fix this, that the year you get everything.
Yes, that's a loaded question. So I wonder if they can clarify defiance, right? Like, are we talking about talking back? Are we talking about, kind of like sneaking out of the house defiance? What type of defiance are we referring to there?
Maybe we'll give, if they're still with us, maybe we'll give them a moment to respond. And while we're waiting, if you can be this nimble, I'll shift us to another question in case they want to take a minute to provide a little more clarification. And that question is about performance anxiety and how we can support students who are struggling with performance anxiety.
Okay, so I would say if you find your child becomes more anxious before like exams or big projects, one effective strategy too, I think sometimes children have a very difficult time, kind of breaking the piece. Like when you think about a big project, right? It's like, where do I start first? I have no idea where to begin. So I think kind of taking, a larger project and breaking it into smaller parts can really help to lessen the anxiety. The other thing too to think about is having them develop like a pre-test routine if you notice that they become anxious before exams. So have your child follow the same steps or each time he or she is about to take a test. This will help to kind of like ease the stress and the anxious thoughts. So the pre-test routine could look like, every time I'm going to take an exam, I'm going to use my, it could just be a certain special pencil or pen, right? But giving it a special name. So this is my coping pen. And then having he or she practice those belly breathing strategies or that positive self-talk, and making it a habit and part of their routine before they go into exams. Now, that's from the parent perspective, though. I will say that there are things that teachers can do in the classroom. I think that all students, right, can benefit from before going into an exam, maybe practicing the grounding technique that we talked about, maybe having the entire class really engaging in social emotional learning, because that's what it's about, right? It's not about just individual students, it's about the collective body of the school really making these strategies at the forefront of our academic programming. So even thinking about from a teacher's perspective, offering those strategies before students kind of take the exam. So then that way everybody can go into the exam, kind of focused and calming their thoughts. But one of the things that I don't want to ignore, obviously, is that we are in a very difficult space right now. And that if you feel like you are seeing a huge shift, right, or change in your child's behavior, so they're withdrawing, they're extremely anxious maybe than before, they really don't want to come out of their room, it's you just continue to see this trend in terms of a decline, right? I would say, please do not hesitate to reach out to your pediatrician. A lot of times pediatricians have, a Rolodex of mental health providers that can obviously assist. And, obviously early intervention is key. So if you start to really notice those extreme changes in behavior, I would definitely urge you to consider that as well.
Thanks, Christy. And we didn't get more clarification on the.
Okay, so I can still kind of address it the best, without having context. I mean, context is always helpful. I think one of the things to really consider with teenagers and sometimes, as students or children start to get older, as parents, we start to get more relaxed, right? We start to get more relaxed. And I think one thing to really emphasize is that teenagers still need structure and they still need rules, right? And, making sure that those rules are explicit and making sure that your expectations are explicit. I mean, to the point, because a lot of times we'll assume that, our kids know what it is that we want them to do. And so when I say explicit, I mean writing it down, right? Or even sitting down with them and you guys developing the rules together. Another thing to think about too is we have to, as parents, we have to have consequences already in place. Because if not, then what we lean towards is our anger and then maybe enforcing a consequence that isn't fair, right? But I even say when teenagers are at that age, having the conversation with them. What do you think the consequence should be when you don't follow the rules, right? Because there are going to be times when you don't necessarily follow the rules that we agreed to. And what do you think the consequence should be? And kind of coming up with a mutual agreement and mutual terms can be very helpful. It can be very helpful with avoiding defiance behaviors.
Thank you, Christy, and thanks to all of the participants who have so actively been a part of the chat. We thank you for that. We want to say one last apology for the technical challenges at the beginning. Thanks for persevering and joining us. We've been very happy to have you with us. We have one more session coming. Before you go, we would really appreciate it if you could fill out our brief survey. I've put the link in the chat, but there's also a QR code on the screen. If you want to access it that way, you can just put your cell phone camera up to the QR code and it should take you to the website, or there's a short bit.ly link at the bottom of the screen. And the next session, do we have a slide on this?
No, we actually do. Yep, there it is.
Okay, great. Our upcoming workshop is next Wednesday, March 10th at 4 o'clock, creating resilience in children that will foster their potential and increase their success in the world. So we hope to see you again then, and hope you have a good week in between. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful evening.